In the dusty frontiers of the old frontier, one gunslinger turned his back on a Comanche maiden presented to him following a fierce shootout, because his soul was already tethered to another corner of the world. But that decision he took rippled through more folks' lives than he could have imagined. Curious why he spurred his mount toward a grieving widow rather than fame? Hit like, share, and subscribe for the whole tale. All right, let's dive in. The arid plain still quivered with the dying rumble of shots as Wyatt Kane slid his pistol into his holster, grit dancing around his spurs. The corpses of 3 bandits sprawled limp in the blistering soil, the toll for snatching 2 Comanche youngins. Wyatt hadn't moseyed into this gulch hunting for strife. He'd just aimed to bring back the pilfered pony he'd spotted straying by the creekside. But calamity out here never knocked polite before crashing the party, and as haze curled from his barrel, he knew he'd galloped headlong into an instant that'd shadow him till his last breath. The Comanche folk emerged gradual-like, slipping from rock formations, their gazes stretched wide with awe and thanks. For a beat, the breeze ruled the hush, skimming etched ravines and lashing loose locks over the ladies' cheeks. The band's elder leader shuffled ahead, propped firm on a timber cane etched with marks of their forebears. His stare, faded by years, glowed with profound wisdom. Wyatt sensed the heft of that look, eyes that had stared down grief, peril, and the uncommon mercy of sudden rescue. "You spared our little ones," the elder murmured, tone even, though a quiver of feeling lurked underneath. A fella who stakes his hide without chasing payback is a soul of grit. Wyatt dipped his chin in deference, uneasy under the acclaim. But the elder pressed on, his words laced with the gravity of old rights. A soul of grit merits kin. At first, Wyatt figured he'd caught it wrong, but then he spotted the last glide forward, Alara. She didn't quiver, didn't duck from posting by her kin's guide. Her poise eased Wyatt's pulse into a reflective rhythm. Alara couldn't have been over 20. Still, her gaze cradled the steady guts of one who'd weathered storms, ambushes, and the bite of a territory that forgave nobody. Her raven tresses draped free down her back, trimmed with just a slender woven plume. She eyed Wyatt, not in dread, not in feigned fondness, but with that gentle, courteous wonder you grant an outsider who's just reshaped your stars. The elder motioned her way soft-like, laying no force, just grave intent. "Should you want," the elder offered, "Ilara will stand as your bride. Our band'll ride at your flank." The declaration sank swift into the sun-baked breeze. Wedlock, a tie hallowed in Comanche lore, never tossed casual, never claimed without a full soul. Wyatt's breath snagged, his boots rooted to the ground like the dust had hardened to granite. The horizon shrunk to the woman before him, fierce, serene, yet plainly tender, hauling her private yearnings unspoken. Wyatt held the Comanche and their paths in high regard. He grasped the gift weren't possession, but tribute, thanks, and alliance. Yet wedlock spelled an endless vow, not a nod. He pondered the duties that'd tag along with taking Alara's side, merging with their clan, swearing safeguard, shaping an existence that'd lash him to their lore and tomorrows. It weren't dread stalling him, but honesty. A gent oughtn't chain another to a road when his own spirit wandered clear to a whole another spock. The parched gust toyed light at Wyatt's duster, flirting the hem like it was coaxing him to voice up, to pick. Trailing him, the final wisps of powder haze melted into the skyline. Around him, the band lingered patient, getting that a call this heavy couldn't be rushed. Gradual, Wyatt glanced Alara's way again. She held his eyes with a courtly tilt, like she was whispering wordless that turning it down wouldn't stain her. She stood solid in her spirit, grounded like a mesquite despite her green years. Wyatt cleared his throat at last, voice hushed but sure. "Your gesture lifts me higher than words can say," he told the elder. But a gent takes a bride only if he can pour out his full spirit. Mine's anchored, yonder. The second they spilled out, he tasted both ease and ache, not for his own sake, but for the hopes he'd just set loose. The band took his reply with solemn grace. No fury, no letdown, just understanding. The elder laid a palm on his arm, noting that forthrightness ranks as the truest tribute. Alara eased back among her kin, a faint curve gracing her mouth. It weren't the grin of one cast off, but one whose trail stayed shielded. She harbored visions, too, visions that shunned being anyone's grave duty. Wyatt saw it then. She'd met the chance of union not from want, but custom, same as she met the passing with poise. Her mettle echoed the lady he truly held dear, a bereft soul called Eliza, hold off leagues off, bearing grief in her glance, but fire in her core. As Wyatt ambled to his mount, the orb sank low, streaking guilt across the gorge rims. The band eyed his leaving, not as a stray, but an ally. He swung aboard, doffing his lid to the elder in a muted send-off, and wheeled toward the trail, winding him back to Eliza's modest spread, a place where chuckles crept back in, where her little lad once clamped around him fierce and free. Wyatt knew full why he couldn't claim Alara. His spirit had picked its course ages before this crossroad, and as he spurred into the burnished dusk, he sensed drawn not by oath, but by devotion. Wyatt inclined his head to the Comanche elder, the mantle of esteem draping his frame like a soft throw. He drawled, words measured, each one freighted with regard. "Your gesture lifts me higher than words can say," he told the elder, "but a gent takes a bride only if he can pour out his full spirit. Mine's anchored, yonder." The zephyr hushed, like the Badlands itself held breath for the candor. Wyatt braced for letdown, maybe a muted pang, but what came was richer insight. The Comanche prized candor over hollow oaths, and they clocked his no as coming from backbone, not slight.
Alara held steady, fingers laced easy, her look serene and noble. She weren't alas shattered by the brush-off, nor one lashed blind to right. No, she felt unburdened. Wyatt caught it in the subtle drop of her stance, the whisper of a beam ease in her features. She honored her elder, honored her band, but she honored her private hopes most. A union sparked by thanks, not hunger, weren't the road she craved. Wyatt brimmed with regard for her fortitude. She merited a mate who picked her from passion, not debt. The elder drew nigh and set a calloused yet firm grip on Wyatt's arm. "A gent who voices truth strides with a light soul," he rumbled. His timbre held no regret, but esteem all round. The band dipped heads in accord. The young'uns Wyatt had freed peeked from 'neath their ma's hems, saucer-eyed and beholden, blind to the profound parley brewin'. Days out west were brutal, fickle, and plenty unjust. But this instant, this barter of straight talk, it rang like a scarce brand of calm. Wyatt pivoted to his reliable bay stallion, the beast that had hauled him through gales, clashes, and endless lonesome dusks. He cinched the girth tight, an odd quiet blooming within. Aft him, the band drifted to their digs, their chores, their daily sway. Not one mutter of ire or blame. It was a truth he'd grasped plenty, but never let sink bone deep. Amongst the Comanche, honor outshone results. They saluted picks, even the thorny ones. As Wyatt toed the stirrup, the dry puff grazed his jaw, crisp and steadying. He vaulted to the seat and peered back once more. Alara lingered by the elder, her profile to the aureate edge. She gave a last incline, a sign bearing no gall, just esteem. Wyatt touched his brim back. Though their realms differed, their trails had tangled with aim, to grant sharpness, nerve, and liberty to chase their own dawns. He wheeled his steed sunward, toward a sweep of vast prairie that bent into gentle swells. The light waned, brushing the vault in honey and blush. Each clip-clop bore him farther from the camp and nearer the humble plot he'd graced moons past. the haven where he'd patched rails, fixed a shingle, and supped hot grub at a rough-hewn board that nigh felt kin. He'd bolted sudden-like then, muttering it was mere labor. But now he owned the fact he'd dodged. Eliza's visage danced in his thoughts, gentle, etched by trials, yet brimming with hushed endurance. She was widowed, same as Alara might have been if he'd nodded yes. But Eliza's woe weren't a load. It was a verse she bore with elegance, not surrender. Wyatt recalled how she'd gazed his way over Chow, her eyes holding a tick too long, like scouting for a spark she half doubted she could claim. And he recalled dodging that wordless call. Then there was her sprout, Tommy, sharp, inquisitive, ever unshod, bursting with wise. The debut time Wyatt rolled up to their claim, the kid charged straight, slinging tiny limbs around his calf and hollering, "Uncle Wyatt!" It jolted him, thawed him, spooked him. Wyatt was a rover, a shooter when pushed, a hand when gigs called. He weren't forged for hearth, or so he'd reckoned. But Tommy paid no mind to that. He just spied a solid soul and cherished him pure. As Wyatt pressed on, recollections swirled like trail dust. The twilights he'd jawed with Eliza on the veranda while constellations draped the dome. The spells Tommy nodded off in his hold after a day of romping. The mutual quiets that soothed deeper than chatter. He'd ghosted it all, convincing himself they fared finer sans him. But today, after witnessing esteem, custom, and a young soul picking liberty, Wyatt at last fathomed his core. He'd long since lit on his anchor. The sun neared spent when he spied the dim shape of Eliza's spread, tendrils of haze twisting from the stack, a cozy gleam leaking from the panes. His chest clenched, not in jitters, but in something profound akin to dawning faith. He reined easy and paused there a spell, drinking in the view. He could wheel off like he'd done endless before. But this evening changed. The route he'd staked weren't forged on bond, right, or demand. It stood on something plain, still, and mighty. Affection. Wyatt clucked soft and tapped his heels. Soft lantern glow lit the stoop where Eliza perched, stitching a tiny coat that screamed her boys. She lifted at the thud of hooves, startle fleeting across her brow afore melting to warmer. Tommy exploded from the frame a heartbeat after, yowling his name with raw delight. Wyatt eased down deliberate, the dying sunbeams enfolding him like a vow. And as he strode their way, he knew his ramble through the years weren't aimless drift no more. It was at last honest to goodness guiding him to hearth.